All right, hello. Welcome to Archival Adventures for the end of April. I hope that you're having a great week. I hope that everything is going well for you. I do know that it is nearing the end of the semester here, and so the library is quite full. And I just realized that my headphones are going to knock into the microphone if I don't clip them. So we're just going to clip those onto the other side of my shirt. But hi, give me 1 second. Of course, I put the clip on backwards. Hi, Hannah. It's good to see you. Hi, Obi-Wan Pez. You love high energy physics. To be frank, your favorite involve gravitation that can overcome the strong nuclear repulsive force. That is a little over my head in just that it's beyond the level of knowledge that I actually have with regard to physics. But I'm excited that you are excited. Oh, this is just, grand, excellent. There. Now I just look extra great with clipping cords all over myself. It's fine. Astrophysics. Yeah, and I know a little bit about classical mechanics. I know a little bit about quantum physics. I know a little bit about string theory. And that's like, I know a little bit about acoustic physics. That is like the extent of my physics knowledge. But I don't have to be an expert to run this show. So that's good because I'm not an expert. So today, for our fourth in the high energy physics series, we will be looking at nuclear winter from a 1980s perspective. But before we get there, I should remember which buttons I need to press. Before we dive into the actual materials for the stream, we're gonna just look at the land and labor acknowledgement from Virginia Tech, because if you didn't know, this show is going out to you from the library at Virginia Tech, where I am the Community Collections Archivist, and this show streams to 2 channels, the library's Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/VTUL Studios, as well as my own personal Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/Rogan27. So, one of those is where you're watching right now. Unless you're watching the VOD on YouTube, in which case, hello VOD people. So these are the official statements for the university. Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tutelo and Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationships with their lands and waterways. We further acknowledge that the Morrill Land Grant College Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands. And wow, my brain derailed there. Sorry. We further acknowledge that the Morrill Land Grant College Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands in Western territories. We understand that honoring Native peoples without explicit material commitments falls short of our institutional responsibilities. Through sustained, transparent, and meaningful engagement with the Tutelo and Monacan peoples and other Native nations, we commit to changing the trajectory of Virginia Tech's history by increasing Indigenous student, staff, and faculty recruitment and retention, diversifying course offerings, and meeting the growing needs of all Virginia tribes and supporting their sovereignty. Virginia Tech acknowledges that its Blacksburg campus sits partly on land that was previously the site of the Smithfield and Solitude plantations, owned by members of the Preston family. Between the 1770s and the 1860s, the Prestons and other local white families that owned parcels of what became Virginia Tech also owned hundreds of enslaved people. We acknowledge that enslaved black people generated wealth that financed the predecessor institution to Virginia Tech, the Preston and Olin Institute. And they also worked on construction of its building. Not until 1953, however, was the first black student permitted to enroll. Through inclusive VT, the institutional and individual commitment to prosim, that I may serve, in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. Wow, you would think I had not read that every week for the last 2 years. But I have. Just, you would think that I hadn't because I stumbled over quite a bit. And yes, if you want to access that yourself, the link is in chat, but also inclusive.vt.edu. That is the people that created it. Now, let's see. Hopefully this does what it's supposed to, and you should see the, nope, that's wrong. Here we go. That one. That's what I was supposed to get up there. This is a list of the materials that we have available to look at today for our fourth part of the High Energy Physics series focused on nuclear winter. Most of these items, from what I can tell, all come from or reference the same conference that happened here at Virginia Tech. There is one item that is that references another conference. Both of the conferences happened in the 1980s. Beyond that, I don't know much. I have been quite busy and have not had a chance to actually glance through these really to sort of see what's there. But in writing up this write-up, I believe most of the things are referencing the same conference. So we have 3 folders from the Charles Kennedy papers. We have 1 folder from the Ann Heidbreder Eastman papers, 1 from the Stanley Huffman papers, looks like 1 from the Norman Grover papers, 1 from the records of the Faculty Senate, and then we have 1 folder from the Rupert Cutler papers, which is the one that is referencing a different conference also on the after effects of nuclear war. So feel free to look through that list if there's one that pops out at you as particularly more interesting than the others. Based on the description, let me know. Otherwise, we will we'll just sort of, I think, just go through them in order. I decided to name our newest batch of kittens after U.S. physicists using just their last names. That's amazing, Hannah. I will choose to believe that I was in some way partly responsible for that, and that choice was partly because I've been talking so much about physics. All right, let's document focus. That's the name of this scene, which is the top-down camera. Wow, my brain today is just... rather than carting up a bunch of boxes, I pulled just the folders. Which, that is apparently a really close-up view of the folders in a not-so-useful way. But also, it's just kind of neat to look at. So yeah, I just pulled folders. So these are the things that we're going to look at. We'll see. This stream is the reason you recognize some of the names on the list of physicists that you were looking through. Amazing. I am very happy to hear that. Let's see. The first thing that I have is actually, I don't think did I neglect to put this on the list? Oh, no, I just didn't scroll down far enough. It's on the list at the bottom if you care to, see the very brief information or find the link to this item in our library catalog. But the first item that I have here is position papers of panelists received as of March 6, 1986. And this is for the Nuclear Winter Strategic and Diplomatic Implications, March 6, 1986 conference. The conference was Nuclear Winter Strategic and Diplomatic Implications. The conference happened March 6, 1986. And we have some position papers here. And in fact, while I've not been through the folders to see what they contain, I did flip through this, and I have bookmarked some that seemed more interesting to sort of share with you all. You gotta love this publication technology here with the, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but the plastic sort of spiral binding. Honestly, state of the art for 1980s local binderies. Like this was definitely just like printed out and bound locally, not sent off to a publisher. But the first one is Thomas Ackerman from the NASA Ames Research Center, which is located in Ames, Iowa, which is where Iowa State is located, just north of Des Moines. So let's see, outline. Properties of smoke and dust particles. Interaction. I just realized that we should look at one thing before we dive into this. And that is, we should maybe look at the brochure for the conference so that we have a spot to start from in understanding what the point of the conference was before reading these position papers. So let's do that. Because I realized I know what it was. Well, I think I know what it was about, but I also know we have a trifold program from it. So I should redirect and go here. This is the back, so we'll ignore the back for the moment and just look at the front. Nuclear Winter, Strategic and Diplomatic Implications, hosted by Virginia Tech, March 6, 1986. Two groups of distinguished panelists will discuss Nuclear Winter at Virginia Tech. Not Nuclear Winter at Virginia Tech, but they will discuss Nuclear Winter, comma, at Virginia Tech, except that the comma is not there. The morning session will address the scientific investigations of the subject, and the afternoon panel will report on the diplomatic and strategic implications. The forum is scheduled 2 days after the Pentagon is planning to release its latest report on nuclear winter. Thankfully, that last statement was not meaning its latest report on the current active nuclear winter, but on the possibility of nuclear winter. Objective of the program: the discussions of nuclear winter and nuclear famine in the scientific circles and commissions have strictly eschewed political issues until now. This condition was necessary in order to allow scientists of opposing ideological powers to cooperate in these studies. Yet these concepts have shown that the threat of nuclear destruction may extend far beyond the superpowers and their allies in Western and Eastern Europe. Today, it appears that the entire world could be destroyed by one nuclear exchange between the superpowers. This concept requires that the strategic situation be re-evaluated. It is paradoxical that the public discussion has not transcended the purely scientific arguments. It is the aim of this forum to open the public discussion of the diplomatic and strategic implications of the nuclear winter concept in light of the scientific findings. I wonder. Yes. Just checking to see if I have enough space to add a tag. Because I realized, if somebody randomly comes across this and I'm talking about this, with some of the headlines that have happened recently, they may think that I'm talking about now. So I wanted to try and, I'm just going to throw a 1980s tag on here, even though it's history and archives and other things like that. I'm just going to toss 1980s into the tags, just to be extra clear. Because the threat of nuclear war is once again in the news, as of this morning. I did not time this on purpose, but I preferred this sort of serendipity when it was me sharing wine labels on National Wine Day. In the early 1960s, it was discovered that strontium-90, an isotope having a lifespan of 28 years, used for its high energy beta emission in certain nuclear electric power sources and constituting a radiation hazard in fallout, was entering into the bones of the milk-drinking population. The determination that the health of this large segment of the world population was in jeopardy became one of the major influences that led to the adoption of the Limited Test Ban Treaty, which bans nuclear atmospheric tests. The issues of nuclear winter have a strong parallel to the concerns fostered by strontium-90. The nuclear winter phenomenon poses sharply the issues of survival of the human race in absolute terms. Senate Resolution 36, sponsored by Senators Hatfield and Proxmire, recommends to President Reagan to propose in Geneva creation of a joint Soviet-American commission to investigate the concept of nuclear winter. Implementation of this recommendation meets opposition from several quarters. It is these doubts and fears that will be addressed at this National Nuclear Winter Forum at Virginia Tech. The forum offers a balanced program for attendance to hear qualified speakers with divergent views on the scientific, diplomatic, and strategic issues. The sponsors were American Association for the Advancement of Science and the Colleges of Engineering and Arts and Sciences at Virginia Tech, departments and individuals within these colleges. AAAS is the connection that ties the various sets of papers together that I have. So I recognize that. Let's see, under the auspices of Virginia Tech's National Speakers Forum, Dr. Paul Ehrlich will speak on the subject of nuclear winter March 5 at 8 p.m. in the Continuing Education Center's auditorium. Huzzah! Let's see. And then we have a breakdown of stuff. Session 1, Scientific Investigations of Nuclear Winter with Barbara Levi as the moderator, and then panelists Thomas Ackerman, Arthur Broyles, George Carrier, Mark Harwell, Alan Hecht, Rafael Herrera, Michael McCracken, Russell Seitz, and Richard Small. And then session 2 was Diplomatic and Strategic Implications with moderator Robert Carter, and then panelists John A. Hearn, Colonel Gary, I think that's Batorn? Yeah, that's definitely a T. I wasn't sure if it was a T or an L. Colonel Gary Batorn, James Bodner, Richard Butler, Richard Davis, Colonel Terry Hawkins, Admiral Noel Gaylor, Joseph Knox, Colonel Russell McDonald, Thomas F. Malone, George Rathjans. I'm not certain how to say that name. Maurice Resch, Robert Simmons, Douglas Waller, and Gary Wexmansky. So if any of those names stick out to you and you want to know what they talked about, that's what this document has. So for sure, if one of those names sticks out and you want to know more for a specific person, let me know. Otherwise, I have picked some that seemed interesting to me. I got really distracted reading through that list by the fact that Colonel Terry Hawkins is in a different font, and I don't know why. But like everything is so polished, and then this one name is just a completely different font and uncertain. Session 3 Media Exchange, Science and Arms Control Specialist from the media. And then they had a reception and a dinner with Senator Albert Gore Sr. and Richard Butler. I had not noticed Al Gore's name there before. I don't know if there's going to be any documentation of what he talked about, but interesting. And then they give some background on Virginia Tech, conference fees and lodging. Ah, interesting. Oh, wow. It was at the, sorry, just from a university history standpoint, lodging is available at the site of the Forum, the Continuing Education Center, which is the graduate school now and does not have housing or any sort of hotel rooms. Interesting. Hi, Key Squared. Welcome. We were just looking at the brochure for the conference that we have the most documentation on for today, which is Nuclear Winter: Strategic and Diplomatic Implications, hosted by Virginia Tech, March 6, 1986. And apparently, at the reception and dinner, Al Gore spoke, which we just discovered. I don't know if there's anything in any of these papers about what he talked about. Maybe we will discover today. All right, so position papers of the panelists. So I had marked some of these, and indeed I had marked Thomas Ackerman from the NASA Ames Research Center. And now that we know that the first session of the day, the one that he spoke at, was focused on the science about nuclear winter, and then the later session was focused on the politics. So this one should be a scientific-focused paper. Let's see. Outline properties of smoke and dust particles, interaction of smoke and dust particles with solar and infrared radiation, urban sources dash particle properties and amounts, rural sources, particle properties and amounts. Okay. From the climate studies which have been performed to date, it has become apparent that injections of large amounts of smoke and dust are sufficient to produce severe climatic perturbations. However, the dependence of the climate perturbation on particle type and total emissions is not easily determined. In fact, a considerable amount of confusion exists concerning the role of particle properties and source strengths in producing climatic perturbations. Basically, two types of particles must be considered in addressing the issue of climatic perturbations following nuclear war. Dust particles produced primarily by surface bursts and smoke particles produced primarily by mass fires ignited by airbursts over soft targets. Some data are available on nuclear dust distributions, although the data have limitations. While the data indicate that size distributions of nuclear dust show some resemblance to dust distributions found in the current atmosphere, there are substantial differences. Virtually no data exist on smoke particles produced by mass fires, particularly those involving urban areas. Some data are available on smoke produced by various combustion processes, but in most cases, the intensity and scale of the fires is far removed from those which would follow detonations of nuclear weapons. However, the measurements which have been made can be combined with theoretical results to form a reasonable model of smoke particles produced by mass fires. The interaction of particles with solar and thermal infrared radiation is crucial to determining the climatic impact of nuclear war. While a detailed treatment of the interaction cannot be given within the framework of this forum, a simple model can be used to illustrate the principal effects, particularly the absorption of solar radiation by the black carbon component of smoke. The model can also be used to demonstrate greenhouse warming by atmospheric gases and the difference between the processes, between the process and the cooling. I thought I had it positioned well, and I did not. And the difference between the process and the cooling by optically thick aerosol layers. It should be clearly recognized that urban areas would be the most important sources of particles in the event of a full-scale nuclear war. This is not to suggest that urban areas are themselves necessarily targets. However, many military targets are located in or adjacent to urban or suburban areas. These areas have high fuel loadings, and the fuels are rich in organic compounds, leading to smoke with a high black carbon fraction. High-value military targets, such as oil refineries and oil storage facilities, are additional potential sources of black carbon particles. While it is difficult to quantify emissions from such sources, reasonable estimates indicate that the amount of smoke produced would be sufficient to trigger disastrous climatic effects. It is perhaps somewhat easier to quantify the potential emissions from rural targets. Recently, several studies have addressed this problem and have produced somewhat different answers. The discrepancies can be understood in light of the different assumptions made in the studies. These assumptions include the area burned, importance of overlap effects, flammability of forests and crops, and biomass amount. Refinement of the results awaits further research on various aspects of the problem. So, 86, talking about nuclear winter specifically, and yet greenhouse warming comes up. Because the same type of calculation that they were doing to try and look at the effects that basically lighting a bunch of oil on fire by hitting it with a nuclear bomb, and the smoke that would result from that, they were trying to they had worked out like the maths to calculate temperature change caused by adding that much black carbon particulate into the air, and this sort of refraction of the sunlight and reflection of the sunlight that would occur. Basically, they were calculating what effect that would have on the global temperatures. And so the same models that they were using to model that, it's noted here, can also be used to demonstrate greenhouse warming by atmospheric gases. So I thought that was an interesting thing that stuck out. Let's see, I had another one marked here. I think this is just like interesting. Because, okay, just full disclosure, I grew up in the 80s. You may have gathered that over time, but yeah, like this happened in 86. In 1986, I was young. When was this? This was March? Yeah, March. So this conference took place 2 months after the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up. Well, more like 1.5 months after the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. And so it was a few months yet. This would have been right around the time where I was moving out of Hawaii and moving to Virginia for the very first time. And I certainly was not aware of the nuclear threat at the age that I was then. But I find it very interesting. This would have been like the same era that movies like oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the movie. I remember the name of the game that the computer wanted to play, a game called Global Thermonuclear War, but I forgot the name of the movie. But it was definitely like a mid-'80s movie. A lot of mid-'80s popular media in the United States was very concerned with the question of nuclear war. So this would have been topical for the era. War Games, thank you, with Matthew Broderick. Yes, Obi-Wan Pez. That is the movie I was thinking of. It's the one where the computer voice saying, "Shall we play a game?" Comes from. All right. Arthur A. Broyles, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, The Uncertainties in Nuclear Winter Predictions. The years since the explosion of the first nuclear bomb have seen a number of I'm just going to take that from the top. The years since the explosion of the first nuclear bomb have seen a number of predictions of global disasters that would result from a nuclear war. Although we all wish that nuclear war would prove to be sufficiently destructive by its own acts to deter an aggressor from starting it, as a matter of fact, each of these proposed deterrents to such a war have, upon further analysis, been shown to be much less severe on a global scale than when first described. A list of these proposed disasters would include fallout, the reduction of the stratospheric ozone layer, and now nuclear winter. Although fallout in the combatant nations will produce many fatalities, worldwide fallout and depletion of the ozone layer have been shown to be much less serious than first proposed. Our purpose here is to consider nuclear winter. In 1982, a paper was published that warned that fires ignited in a nuclear war would spread over such an area and would generate so much smoke that the Earth's climate would be altered. The reaction to this possibility from a number of foresters was to point out that large fires do not occur just because they are ignited. They can only happen when extremely dry, windy, and hot weather provides the conditions under which fires can spread. Forests are ecosystems that are in equilibrium with their environments. These environments include lightning and man-made fires that provide frequent ignition. The addition of ignitions by the heat radiation from nuclear bombs would not be likely to produce fires that spread over long distances. Without this spreading, forests are not likely to produce enough smoke to cause a nuclear winter. Sorry, something just went. Okay, camera, what just happened, camera? All of a sudden, the camera decided that it does not want to be connected to the controls that I have for it. So give me 1 second. Because I'm afraid that if I leave it alone, we might just, lose the view. And I don't want that to happen. Okay. So this is interesting. It's talking about how initial predictions of nuclear winter may have been a little bit exaggerated over what would actually happen, which that is interesting. I had not, I think, really thought about it. I also love that it mentions foresters here and like their analysis of like forest fires, which if anybody here has lived through like the last decade and a half or 2 decades, you know that fires have become significantly more common, like annual, like a whole like Western fire season in the United States of America, as well as throughout the Northern Hemisphere, which has been linked to just overall global climate change related to the Anthropocene and the changing of the raise in global temperatures caused by the existence and activities of mankind. Wow, that sentence was hard to actually get out of my mouth in coherent words. But so I'm curious if their analysis would change at all today, based on the fact that we basically have a fire season now. Basically every summer is hot enough that fires spread, and dry enough. And I'm curious what will happen this year, because there was an unusually wet end to winter in California. But I'm digressing. Let's continue. Unless you have comments. Comments are welcome. Another paper appeared in the following year, TTAPS, warning. If anyone wants to look up TTAPS and let me know what is being referred to there, that'd be great. Otherwise, I will look in a few minutes. Warning that smoke produced in a nuclear war, primarily from the burning of cities, would lead to a temperature drop in the temperate zones to 10 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. A more recent, much more thorough study by an international committee, NUWAR scope. I'm so curious what that acronym is standing for. And I'm curious how hard they worked to create an acronym that included the word scope and the word war. ENUWAR scope has modified this to say that temperature drops in the northern high and mid-latitudes would be relatively inconsequential in the winter time. A more recent, more thorough study. Temperature drops in the northern high and mid-latitudes would be relatively inconsequential during the winter. Okay. I mean, winter already gets cold in the northern high and mid-latitudes, so I'm not sure how much colder they really thought it was going to get. Cooling effects from a summer war, while very substantial, are no greater, and indeed maybe much less, than the cooling which occurs every winter. However, this report and others warn that the data on which we base the calculations of the effect of the smoke generated in a nuclear war are very uncertain. Let us consider some of these data. To calculate the smoke produced in a city fire, we must know how much burnable fuel is present per unit area. Respectable sources quote average values for urban areas that range from 10 to 20 kilograms per square meter. The upper value is twice the lower, so that we say that this number is uncertain by a factor of 2. Next, we must know the fraction of the fuel that will burn. The numbers in use again vary over a factor of 2. The mass of smoke produced per unit mass of fuel burned varies more than a factor of 10. Most of the fuel in a city is wood products, while petroleum products produce most of the black absorbent smoke. The fraction of the city fuel that is of the latter kind is uncertain to a factor of 2. The amount of heat radiation assumed by researchers to be required to ignite a building varies over a factor of 7. It enters the formula for smoke production twice, so that the range of error in this last number is 7 times 7, or approximately 50. That is, the largest amount of smoke that is likely to be produced by the fire is 50 times the smallest, due to the uncertainty in the amount of heat radiation required to ignite a building. As the hot smoke from the fire rises, the air cools and often forms clouds whose droplets can remove smoke particles. The fraction by which this quantity of smoke is reduced by this process has quoted values that range from 0.1 to 0.9, so that is uncertain by a factor of 9. And so it goes. Multiplying these uncertainty factors together implies that the maximum amount of smoke produced could exceed the minimum amount by a factor of 36,000, a ridiculous number. This does not take account of the uncertainty in the number of cities attacked. There are, in addition, other uncertainties, such as the size and optical properties of the smoke, the area over which the smoke is distributed, etc. We can expect that the errors in any numbers that we choose will not all be in the same direction. In addition, each researcher believes that the ranges of uncertainty are less for his numbers because of his own personal biases. Nevertheless, it is clear that any calculations of the effects of smoke produced in a nuclear war are very uncertain. We might ask how these uncertainties reflect in the temperature changes that we might expect at the Earth's surface. To see this, we make use of a parameter used by scientists called the optical depth. It is a measure of the thickness of the smoke cloud, and it's proportional or inversely proportional to the quantities, I read that wrong. It is a measure of the thickness of the smoke cloud and is proportional or inversely proportional to the quantities that we have considered above. Thus, the error factors that we have listed can be applied to it. I've used a set of parameters that I consider reasonable to calculate the value of the optical depth of the cloud that might result from an all-out city attack on the United States and the Soviet Union, assuming that the resulting smoke spreads uniformly over the 30 to 70 degree north latitude band. I find that it will have an optical depth of 0.2. Whew, this dives in a little bit, but I'm enjoying it. RDSES has made the calculations that are presented in figure number 1 that show the relation between the optical depth and the temperature at the Earth's surface. We see that a value of the optical depth of 0.2 has essentially no effect on the surface temperature. On the other hand, increasing it by a factor of 7 will reduce the temperature by 20 to 25 degrees centigrade, 36 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, centigrade being an old term for what is now called Celsius. Thus, the uncertainties in the input data for calculations of the surface temperature are great enough to allow this drop in temperature. In my opinion, the uncertainties in these calculations can be greatly reduced by further research. We can, for example, survey the cities to determine the quantity and kind of fuel that is there. However, at the present time, we can see that a serious drop in temperature from an all-out city nuclear war is no more likely to occur than no temperature reduction at all. This work was performed under the auspices of the U.S. Department of Energy by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, UNCER contract, or I think that's supposed to be under contract, and then there's a contract number. So there's a chart. Projected temperature changes are highly sensitive to hemisphere average absorption optical depth. Hemispheric average absorption optical depth. Projected surface temperature on day 10 for various values of the mean hemispheric absorption optical depth as a function of latitude. I read the thing, I'm looking at the numbers, and they're not really braining my brain. On day 10, yep, at 30 degrees latitude, we're looking at minus 25. But that's the only one that gets down that low. Everything else, I mean, between 30 and 55 degrees latitude, between 25 and 55 degrees latitude, the temperature gets kind of cold, but the coldest it gets is minus 25, and let me tell you, we're doing a fine enough job causing those temperatures to happen during the winter months without dropping nuclear weapons. I know, I used to live in Minnesota, and I certainly experienced a couple of minus 37 degree days, and I wasn't even very far north in Minnesota. I was just in central Minnesota. They were cold. That said, just because it gets cold doesn't mean that does not mean that climate change isn't happening. It gets cold in the winter. That still happens. And minus 37 is bad. But overall average temperatures are up. Okay. The third one that I had selected from this item is this paper by Alan Hecht, Director, National Climate Program Office, NOAA, Rockville, Maryland. Nuclear Winter, Soviet Scientific Analysis. Summary. And we may not get past the summary. I don't know how long this paper is. I think this one is longer. So we may just read the summary. Unless you really like the paper and want me to keep going. But the hypothesis of nuclear winter has raised a number of scientific issues which challenges the capability of existing climate models to simulate such phenomena. Analysis of the problem reveals many gaps in our understanding of atmospheric circulation, cloud-smoke interactions, atmospheric chemistry, and fire phenomenology. As a problem in itself, it underscores the need for improved understanding in all of these areas, which is more than justifiable on other grounds as well. Published Soviet research on nuclear winter has focused almost exclusively on climate model simulations, and the biological and sociological consequences of climate change induced by nuclear war. There is, in addition, a small amount of basic atmospheric research related to nuclear winter, which is ongoing at several major laboratories. Soviet scientists have long engaged in research on nuclear effects, with particular emphasis on the distribution of radioactive fallout, radioactive effects on human populations, and chemical changes in the atmosphere. The issue of nuclear winter naturally falls into this diverse and often highly publicized research to study nuclear effects in general. In this context, Soviet efforts have predominantly been confined to climate modeling. Such work was initiated by the Computing Center for the Soviet Academy of Sciences, CCAS, in 1983 after publication by Kritson and Burks in Ambio of their nuclear war analysis. Okay. The model available to Soviet investigators was developed as an outgrowth of collaborative efforts under the US-USSR bilateral on environmental protection to study problems of climate change, such as those due to increased amounts of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Based on an older atmospheric general circulation model developed in the United States, it has been improved by Soviet scientists, although its overall capability is limited by Soviet computer power. The significant limitation is in spatial degrees latitude by 15 degrees longitude. Wait, well, I skipped a line. Sorry, one significant limitation is in spatial resolution. The horizontal resolution of the Soviet model is 12 degrees latitude by 15 degrees longitude. Two vertical layers represent the troposphere from the surface to about 12 kilometers to about 12 kilometers of altitude. By comparison, a much-used climate model at the National Center for the National Center for Atmospheric Research has a resolution of 4.5 degrees of latitude and 7.5 degrees of longitude, with 9 layers throughout the troposphere and stratosphere from the surface to about 30 kilometers of altitude. The application of any climate model to simulation problems, such as nuclear winter, is based on the ability of the model to represent the essential physical factors involved. Even the largest models today are limited by inadequate representation of some major atmospheric processes. In addition to the degree of physical felicity of a model, the assumptions about forcing processes used as input to the model are crucial in that the greater the perturbation, the strong will be the model. I think the greater the perturbation, the stronger will be the model response. In a nonlinear system, even the character of the response may change beyond some critical forcing level. Calculating the climate effect of large amounts of smoke in the atmosphere is extremely complicated and depends on many factors for which there is only limited information or understanding. These include how much smoke is generated, how high the smoke rises, how much smoke remains in the atmosphere. The projected global climate effects depend on all of the above factors, much of which should be calculated interactively in a climate model. All current models are stressed to address the problem, not only because of limits in physical understanding, but also because of many of these interactions involve processes on much smaller scales than those resolved in the models. Against this background, it can be seen that the first Soviet experiment, like the initial TTAPS study and other early model studies, were aimed at defining the bounds of the problem rather than fully analyzing the potential climatic events. Wow, I am stumbling now. I'm going to look up TTAPS because I don't know what it is. All right, this from the Encyclopedia Britannica. TTAPS. So this is from the article Nuclear Winter in Encyclopedia Britannica. The TTAPS study coined the term nuclear winter and its ominous hypotheses about the environmental effects of a nuclear war came under intensive study by both the American and Soviet scientific communities. So it was an initial study that first postulated the idea of nuclear winter, and TTAPS is formed from the initials of the last names of its authors: R.P. Turco, O.B. Toon, T.P. Ackerman, J.B. Pollock, and Carl Sagan. Interesting. Turco, Toon, Ackerman, Pollock, and Sagan. Practical consequences of the resolution limitations for the published Soviet models is that the internal physics and resolution allow only first-order and coarse grid average approximations of the complex physics of smoke cloud evolution. The limited vertical resolution also severely restricts the variety of interactions between the radiation perturbations and the induced circulation anomalies. This limits the present models to establishing fairly gross characterizations of the expected climate change for any given perturbation. All right. Soviet model results were first presented by Alexandrov in 1983 at the International Conference on Nuclear War, which met in Erice, Sicily in August of 1983. In this simulation, he used the 10,000 MT. The only word I know of that is abbreviated MT is mountain or mount, but that doesn't make sense. Metric ton? It must be metric ton. Use the 10,000 metric ton war scenario by Turco et al. As input to his model, but assumed optical and scattering properties for the smoke and dust, which correspond to an injection amount several times greater than the Turco upper limit. Smoke in the troposphere was given an optical thickness for the shortwave radiation as 6 for the first month, 3 for the next 2 months, and 0.5 for the remaining year. The stratosphere was loaded with dust with an optical thickness considerably less than the lower atmosphere. The smoke and dust were uniformly spread in the atmosphere between 12 and 90 north latitude, and the atmosphere and ocean interacted through a thermodynamic ocean model. Run for nearly a year, and temperature changes were calculated from global averages. Huh. Whereas in the United States and Western Europe, there's been a strong internal debate on the scientific merits of nuclear winter and a minimum of extrapolation to policy and political dimensions. The reverse has been true in the Soviet Union. Much of the Soviet modeling results has been highly publicized, as will be described by other speakers. The biological consequences of the implication of the climate results has also been assessed by Soviet scientists as part of their contribution to the International Scope Report on nuclear effect. However, the fact that great uncertainties exist and that additional research is needed is well known to the Soviet scientists. They're sensitive to the credibility of their contributions and to their personal reputations, particularly among Western colleagues, and public statements of the application of the scientific results are not to be taken as an indication of Soviet scientific inability to recognize the limitation of existing studies. Huh. Huh. Interesting. I did not, growing up in the 80s, being familiar with the idea of like potential nuclear winter, I was completely unaware until reading this that Western science, like US and European scientists, generally considered nuclear winter not to be that big of a threat. And it was Soviet scientists who considered it to be a really big threat, because the popular media here in the country, like growing up, what I remember from 1980s film and television here in the US was nuclear winter is a big threat. So to see them basically saying, yeah, US scientists don't really think this is a big problem and nothing to really worry about, it's the Soviets that are really concerned with it. I got the opposite impression from watching TV and movies growing up here. That to me is somewhat interesting. Let's see. Okay, so what I have next, I have this first folder from the Charles Kennedy collection. And Charles Kennedy is, just pull this up. I could get a little info on who he is. The first full-time professor of religion at Virginia Tech starting in 1967. He was hired to teach the Bible and Asian religions. He was also the advisor of international studies from 1972 to 79, and he retired as the head of the religion department in 1994. But he was apparently at this conference. So let's see. Inter-office memo. Let's see. March 27, 1987. Dear Charles Kennedy, thank you for forwarding materials concerning your proposed collection of essays on various aspects of nuclear winter. I've now read these materials with some care and interest. All indications are that it was an exciting conference. Perhaps a book will ultimately emerge from these materials. But I'm not convinced, having read what you forwarded, that the book would be for us. Oh dear. On the whole, I feel the work would be rather diffuse, both stylistically and substantively. While individually articles or even descriptions are quite forceful, my sense of the whole is that it would very much remain a set of proceedings. We cannot take such works on as a matter of policy. You might try Westview Press. Where is this from? The University of Massachusetts Press. Apparently they don't publish proceedings of conferences. Or didn't at the time. Let's see, another letter from Dear Mr. Martin, thank you for your encouraging response to our letter of February 12th concerning a proposed collection of essays on the scientific and strategic implications of nuclear winter. To carry deliberations forward to the next stage, I enclose the following materials. 2 complete essays, one by the Harwells on the scientific side and one by Admiral Gaylor on the strategic side. Brief position statements written by some of the contributors. On the basis of this package, I would estimate that the final manuscript would run to some 320 pages. I wonder if it got published. Or if we just have, because that was the position statements that we were looking at. Ooh. Oh, wait. Is this a proposed table of contents? What is this? I cannot make out what that says. But does anybody else think that says dogs are already off first? Whenever there's a handwritten note, I like to look at it and see if I can figure out, like, because sometimes it adds context or important clarification. This one is just confusing. Yet fun. Why were the dogs on first? Were they playing baseball? I'm very curious. So looking at this, it looks like their proposed table of contents here, their table of contents, that appears to be the program in order by alphabetical by last name, but that's how they were listed in the program too. Interesting. And they were looking for a publisher. I'm going to skip some of these letters and see if I can find, did they ever actually, like, do more? Copy of a sample letter. Ooh. Introduction. This is the Harwells, Mark and Christine. Global Nuclear Family. A changing perspective on nuclear war. And yeah, this collection still has staples, and metal paper clips in it, apparently. It happens. So this one must have gone through like MPLP, more product, less process. So faster processing than full processing. Let's see. Historically, there has been a strong emphasis on examining the direct, immediate effects of nuclear detonations on humans, based primarily on data from individual nuclear tests and from the previous limited nuclear war on Japan. Only recently has attention been given to the longer-term, indirect effects on the global environment from multiple nuclear detonations. Yet there has been a tremendous increase in the potential magnitude of a modern nuclear war since the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. Under the auspices of the International Council of Scientific Unions Scientific Committee on Problems of the Environment, that being the name of the what is referred to as scope, the environmental effects of nuclear war project was initiated. And here we have NU War scope. Environmental effects of nuclear war, International Council of Scientific Unions Scientific Committee on Problems of the Environment. A lengthy name that is hard to parse because they wanted it to spell scope. With the goal of reaching consensus within the international scientific community concerning the global environmental effects of nuclear war. Over a 2-year period, the Scope NU War project involved the participation of about 100 physical and atmospheric scientists and an additional 200 agricultural and ecological scientists from more than 30 countries around the world in a unique undertaking to assess the global consequences of nuclear war. Soon after the project's inception, the possibility for large-scale disturbances to the Earth's atmosphere and climate was demonstrated, and nuclear winter effects became a major focus of NU War. Okay. So they were interested in it. Volume 1 concluded that the large-scale climatic alterations are a plausible outcome. The primary determinant of climatic perturbations is that nuclear weapons are extremely effective incendiary devices, and detonations near urban or industrial areas could result in a large number of major fires burning throughout the northern mid-latitudes, releasing enormous quantities of highly light-absorbing smoke into the atmosphere. In addition, surface bursts, such as from attacks on missile silos, could inject large amounts of dust into the atmosphere, causing sunlight to be scattered. Interesting numbers here. A few thousand megatons of total yield in a nuclear exchange could create smoke and dust clouds which would obscure 99% or more of the sunlight in at least the northern hemisphere. With air temperatures dropping by tens of degrees Celsius within days. As the particulates were removed from the lower atmosphere, sunlight and temperature levels would ameliorate, but the particulates in the upper atmosphere could remain for long periods of time, resulting in temperatures a few degrees below normal, persisting for months to a few years. This constitutes the chronic phase of climatic disturbances. Scientists in the NU War project identified many uncertainties in these climatic analyses. For example, the size and nature of a nuclear war, the amount and composition of smoke produced, the heights to which smoke and dust would be injected, the rates at which particulates would be scavenged from the air. A range of climatic alterations is possible, and many uncertainties cannot be precisely resolved. Nevertheless, the nuclear winter paradigm, here defined to include all aspects of the indirect consequences of nuclear war, not just lowered temperatures and reduced sunlight, was indicated as possible for all but the most limited nuclear war scenarios or the most optimistic values for analytical parameters. And they go on to discuss the effects on crops and livestock and precepts based on the experiences of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have dominated policy thinking for the last 4 decades. Rather than reflecting images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a modern nuclear war would, for most of the people of the world, much more resemble current images of Ethiopia and the Sudan. Increases in the scale of potential devastation have resulted in qualitatively new phenomena that must be recognized for their pervasive policy implications. So, rather than a damaged environment recovering, think desert, where nothing grows. Interesting. Ooh, we have figures. Figures are fun, if they're interpretable. Reduction in area capable of maturing spring wheat as annual temperature decreases from the 1950 to 80 normals period in Western Canada. Yes, that is how you spell Saskatchewan. I love maps like this. So areas capable of maturing spring wheat. They're not saying that all these areas are being used to mature spring wheat. They're just saying that areas where it's possible will reduce. So the dark dotted line is the present in the 80s boundary line of where it would be possible. And then the lighter dotted line with the smaller dots indicates the area, or the reduction, the reduced area. Okay, I'm going to push on from here and see what else we can discover. I'm always fascinated. I always learn something new. We explore so many different topics on this show. I always encounter something that I've never seen before and never really thought about in this way. And I enjoy that quite a bit. Nuclear winter, the strategic and diplomatic implications. A 30-minute summary of a conference. Apparently there is a video, but I did not know this. I didn't see any mention of a video in... I wonder if it... I didn't see a video in our catalog. Incidentally, the music today is quite interesting. Yeah, I'm curious where that video is. It says video on VM1, but maybe we didn't get the video. Oh. I get to try an act, though, apparently, if I want to read this. The world has watched with anxiety as radioactive clouds drift around our planet, Green vegetables are banned from markets in half a dozen countries. Livestock are checked for radioactivity. Meat served in restaurants and milk intended for children reveal traces of radioactivity. Children are given doses of iodine to counteract possible side effects of the radiation. This is what happened after an accident at the Soviet nuclear plant in Chernobyl. What would happen in the wake of a nuclear war between the superpowers? The immediate devastation would be horrible. But a group of scientists have raised the question about after effects of nuclear war, not on buildings and people, but on the climate that sustains life on our planet. Their word for the after effect is nuclear winter, a chilling of the climate that would threaten the agricultural life chain and so endanger all of human life far beyond the limits of the blast areas. The theory of a nuclear winter was raised first by a few scientists. Their theories are now part of the strategy and diplomatic planning of governments around the world. To discuss strategic and diplomatic implications of nuclear winter, a group of distinguished scientists and policymakers came to Virginia Tech Institute and... Sorry, I misread that horribly. Once more, with feeling. To discuss strategic and diplomatic implications of nuclear winter, a group of distinguished scientists and policymakers came to Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University in Blacksburg, Virginia. They spent the day presenting various interpretations of the scientific evidence for nuclear winter, and then considering what these interpretations meant for strategic planning and diplomacy. The opening speaker was Thomas Ackerman from the NASA Ames Research Laboratory and one of the authors of the original report that brought the nuclear winter scenario to public attention. And then you get Ackerman, who I have no idea what he sounds like, so I won't be doing an impression. Nuclear detonations produce fires. Nuclear weapons are very efficient incendiary devices, perhaps the most efficient ever built. Those fires produce smoke. Those thick, elevated smoke layers produce surface cooling. As long as we have the possibility of starting these fires, of injecting the smoke in the atmosphere, we have the possibility of climatic disaster. The exact extent of that climatic disaster depends on many things. It depends on the available fuels, the fuel types. It depends on the emission factors. It depends on how much of the smoke is scavenged by the immediate precipitation, the black rain. It depends on how much is scavenged in the short term by normal atmospheric processes. It depends on how much the smoke can modify the circulation and the precipitation processes in the atmosphere. So we have many uncertainties, but these uncertainties don't mean that because there are uncertainties, the problem goes away or that we should ignore the problem. Nuclear winter is a theory about global climatic changes that may follow a nuclear war. Although the superpowers occupy the northern hemisphere, there is no way to contain the fallout from a nuclear war in the northern hemisphere. Dr. Rafael Herrera of the Venezuela Institute of Science Studies spoke for the non-combatants who would have to face the consequences of even a few degrees of cooling in the atmosphere on the growth of tropical crops, especially staple foods such as rice. Agriculture in the tropics is as vulnerable, or maybe even more so, than in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, mainly because crops are adapted or are biologically adapted to very narrow changes in temperature and precipitation and the onset of rains. The end of the rainy period and temperature control of the harvest. And may I say, maybe the most important crop of all the tropics as a staple food, rice, is so sensitive that you don't have to evoke minus 15 Celsius to say that that would be a catastrophe. 15 plus Celsius is enough to stop the panicles from maturing, so you wouldn't have any rice production if night temperatures dropped to 15 Celsius, which is more or less what we have here. a bit 2 or 3 degrees less than what we have in this room. In Brazil alone, 165 million hectares would be lost to major crops if the temperature drops only 3 degrees. It's interesting. This is really, really neat and terrifying, but also talking about like the opposite problem of what we're actually experiencing, which is man-made climate change causing temperatures to go up, which this doesn't talk about exactly how, but would also affect things negatively. We have another copy of the position papers in here. I want to look at some of these other things. This entire topic is interesting. And I'm surprised at just how interesting I'm finding it. Like, I knew I was interested in it. I knew it sounded like an interesting topic. I'm generally not somebody who enjoys going back and like reading conference proceedings. And yet, what I have next is from the Stanley A. Huffman Jr. papers. So let us see what they will give us. So Stanley A. Huffman Jr. was a school teacher, administrator, professor, consultant, and producer of television programs for education, with a particular emphasis on use of technology and media. He held degrees from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and the University of Virginia. From 1971 to 1987, he served as the director of the Learning Resources Center, and from 1987 to 1991, he was the director of distance learning at Virginia Tech. All right. What might be here? We have minutes from the planning committee. I don't know. So there's attendance, and then there's a report on publicity. They had a publicity update. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 people present. Oh, academia, hello. Nuclear Winter Forum Planning Committee, Meeting X. Not a rating. February 20th, 1986. I don't know that anyone would have thought that the Nuclear Winter Forum Planning Committee agenda or notes or whatever these are, Meeting X was rated X. I honestly don't know that anyone ever would have thought that. But academia felt the need to put not a rating. I'm sure it was intended as humorous, but also just like, wow. Let's see. Publicity stuffs. They had a media panel with 4 people on it. Amazing. Eric Severide? I don't know who that is, but apparently they wanted him to be the moderator, and he was local. lengthy. Lengthy program report here. Let's see what else we have. Videotape. These are like all minutes of this planning committee, which, wow. Addressed to Ms. Rita Ray from Stan Huffman. Dear Rita, I enjoyed talking with you on the telephone this morning, and I appreciate your interest in the Nuclear Winter National Forum. I am truly sorry that I selected the middle of the PBS fundraiser to hold our event. However, enclosed is a program of the day's events. If anything is of particular interest to you, please don't hesitate to call. I do intend to send to you the tape that will be made of our learning resources, or made by... So they made a tape. I want the tape. Where's the tape? We have so much stuff on this event, and as far as I can tell, there's no copy of the tape. There are multiple letters here apologizing for scheduling it during the PBS fundraiser. That is interesting. That's very, very interesting. Oh, wow. Welcome. Hello. Hello and welcome, Whimsies, to Serious Times here on Archival Adventures. Welcome in, everybody, from 16-Bit Eric's stream. If you're new here, I am Anthony Right Day Hernandez, otherwise known as Rogan27, and I am hosting a weekly show here from the library at Virginia Tech, where I share materials from our archives and special collections. And today is the last Wednesday of the month, which means we're focused on a topic within the realm of high energy physics. And today's topic just happens to be nuclear winter. Super whimsical, that, right? It's actually been kind of interesting so far. But welcome in, everybody. And if anybody here was not following 16-Bit Eric, you definitely should. 16-Bit Eric is honestly one of my inspirations, one of the best streamers that I have ever seen, and just an all-around great person. So if you're not following, you should. And I'm just going to toss that shout out to on both channels, if I can. And if anybody's over on the V2L Studios channel and is just confused about what's going on, I just got rated on the other channel because we're on 2 channels. So yeah, we're looking at stuff about nuclear winter. A lot of stuff from a conference that took place at Virginia Tech in 1986, March of 1986, called the Nuclear Winter Strategic and Diplomatic Implications, hosted by Virginia Tech, March 6, 1986. And yeah, we've seen some interesting position papers by some of the scientists that spoke, and I have yet to find the remarks that were given by Al Gore at the dinner that night. Apparently, Al Gore spoke. I did learn, apparently, U.S. and European scientists were less concerned about nuclear winter than Soviet scientists were. Also, I should say, hi, Adventures of Tony, and hi, Thorkel. Just here on a whim. Thank you for joining, and thanks for popping in the chat and saying hi. I'm looking through right now the papers of Stanley Huffman Jr. to see what jumps out at me. So far, these materials all seem to be about planning the forum, which is, in this case, less interesting than the content of the forum was. Not that it's uninteresting, just not what I was particularly looking for. I think it's really interesting, though, confidential, FYI. I have never seen a document marked as confidential in my time here. So, just interesting. But there's so many things. There's things in here talking about, like, there's a freaking script, and apparently they made a video summarizing, like, the conference, and as far as I can tell, we don't have it. Otherwise, I would have pulled it, and we would be watching this video. The discussions on nuclear winter and nuclear famine conducted until now in the scientific circles and commissions has strictly eschewed political issues. This was a necessary precondition for scientists of antagonistic powers to cooperate in these studies. Yet these concepts have shown that the threat of nuclear destruction may extend far beyond the superpowers and their allies in Western and Eastern Europe. Today, it appears possible that the entire world could be destroyed by one simple nuclear exchange between the superpowers. The concept requires that the strategic situation be re-evaluated. It is paradoxical that the public discussion has not gone beyond the purely scientific. It is the aim of this forum to open the public discussion of the diplomatic and strategic implications of the nuclear winter concept in the light of the scientists' findings. What will happen to deterrence in the light of this concept? What are the reactions of the governments of the US and USSR, insofar as they are publicly known, in this new strategic situation? SR 36 was a recommendation to the President to propose at the arms talks in Geneva creation with the Soviet Union of a joint commission to investigate the concept of nuclear winter. It was sent to the President without a single public hearing. While SR 36 envisages the eventual broadening of the commission to, quote, the other nuclear powers, unquote, what about the innocent bystanders, the non-nuclear, indeed the non-aligned and neutral states? In the program that follows, where individuals are named, the forum has been discussed with them, and we have their provisional expression of interest of definitive acceptance. A formal invitation has been or is being extended. Below, an asterisk indicates the final acceptance of the invitation. Affiliations are given for identification only. Keynote address, Senator Albert Gore Sr., talking about the Limited Test Ban Treaty. Hey, now we know for sure that he was the keynote and talked about the Test Ban Treaty. Barbara Levi from Princeton was the moderator for first session, and we've seen this list. We saw this list earlier. Huh. Interesting. Oh, provisional budget, $46,000. Following on $20,000. Oh, $46,000 is funding they've received so far. Expenses expected so far, $20,000. Let's see, I've got 15 minutes left. I'm gonna see what we can find quickly and of particular interest. Yeah, this is lots of like notes. There's so many notes about, like, they took good notes, good minutes for their meetings. Sorry, I just saw this, and so I have to look at this because librarians for nuclear arms control, based in Pasadena, California, apparently. And, you know, as an archivist, I am also a librarian, or at least my degree is in librarianship. So, Stan, can you field this one, or should I? Morton. It's Morton, not Martin, because this is addressed to Professor Morton Nadler, January 29th, 1986. I don't want to pull the post-it off because over time, post-its will lose their stickiness, and it's not attached any other way. So for now, I'm not going to remove it. But dear Professor Nadler, I have just received the brochure on your program on nuclear winter to be held March 6th. The program looks very exciting, and I wish I could be there. The Librarians for Nuclear Arms Control publishes a newsletter which includes bibliographies and informational data of interest to persons in our profession. Last year, we produced a bibliography on nuclear winter. I'm enclosing a copy of this bibliography and its update. If you are able to use it in any way for your program, please feel free to do so. You may copy the bibliography for redistribution to participants if you wish. I would like to report the fact that this program was held with more detailed information on how it went in an issue of our newsletter. If you are planning to tape the event and Dr. Ehrlich's speech, I would like to have the details on how to obtain a copy. Signed, Janet Jenks, Treasurer and Membership Coordinator of the Librarians for Nuclear Arms Control. Oh, awesome. I had heard of that organization before. I had forgotten that it existed, but I had heard of it. So, interesting. All right, next, let's see, we've got some papers here from Norman Grover. We've got some more Charles Kennedy stuff. Is that a different collection? It is. It's a different Charles. Oh, the first thing that I looked at was not actually from Charles Kennedy's papers. It was from the Ann Eastman papers. The folder name was Charles Kennedy, which led to my confusion. Okay, limited time left. Let's see. Nuclear Winter Strategic and Diplomatic Implications, March 6, 1986, from the Norman Grover papers. We have the trifold brochure for the conference, which we've looked at already, and now the camera has turned off. This is a new behavior that has happened a few weeks in a row now. I'm going to need someone to discover why the camcorder keeps turning off in the middle of my stream. Because that's not good. It's not hard to like power it off and on again. The hard part is making it not wobbly after I do so. As you can see, it is continuing to be wobbly. Anyway, I'm not going to get distracted. Clearly, I'm kidding. Ooh, we've got biographies of the people. That might be interesting. Presentation, Nuclear Winter. Possibly interesting. Right now, I'm just gonna skip through. Ooh, Hannah, thank you. The Librarians for Nuclear Arms Control was an incorporated nonprofit in California in 1985 and dissolved in 1993. Thank you for that. I had heard of them. Because I know I've seen other documents relating to them. I just didn't remember anything about them. That's the script that we looked at before for the video that they apparently produced that we don't have a copy of, that I wish we had a copy of. We might. It just doesn't show up in our catalog. So many of the... It's another rejection letter from a publisher. We've seen one of those already. But we also have a transcription of the conference. That might be worth looking at. Set this one aside. We might go there for a second. Oh, well, I did say that we were interested in potentially finding out what Al Gore talked about. This one has a transcription of Gore's words from the conference, so we may end with that. Oh, this paperclip just popped off. that's probably going to be like the most just generally like politically interesting item here. I think the science stuff was really interesting. I did want to glance at this though. This is a different conference. This is from the Rupert Cutler papers, and Rupert Cutler. I need the bio note. It's a very lengthy biographical note. He's just like a big name guy here in the area. Let's see. I thought he was a politician. He was appointed by Jimmy Carter to serve as Assistant Secretary of Agriculture for Conservation Research and Education. And we have his papers here. So, he apparently was involved with or attended a conference called The World After Nuclear War that happened on October 31st, or from October 31st to November 1st, 1983. It was the only other thing I had that seemed like it might be nuclear winter related. That was not directly from the Virginia Tech Conference. And let's see, they had some sponsors, a steering committee. I think the conference origins are the place to start. There's a thing here called the Moscow link. Dialogue via satellite between physicists and biologists in Washington and Moscow concerning the findings of the conference on the world after nuclear war. They were apparently live streaming their conference to Moscow in 1983. The conference on the long-term worldwide biological consequences of nuclear war developed more than a year ago out of the mutual concerns of scientists, environmental leaders, and foundation executives. In early 1982, environmentalists were engaged in a United Nations effort to assess progress over the previous decade in tackling the long-term threats to the global environment identified at the 1972 Stockholm UN Conference on the Human Environment. However, the most serious long-term threat to the planet, nuclear war, was not among the issues under consideration. Indeed, it had not been generally regarded as an environmental issue. Environmental leaders recognized this oversight, and those involved became convinced that the environmental community should take an active role in addressing this issue. At about the same time, there was concern among scientists that such studies as had been made of the long-term environmental consequences of nuclear war were both limited in scope and outdated. And then there's a very lengthy reference. A special issue of Amiibo, the journal of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, presented new findings and indicated new areas of concern. Meanwhile, an independent group of scientists was conducting new atmospheric studies, employing a series of physical models and discovering the factors ignored in previous studies discovering that factors ignored in previous studies could well lead to unanticipated longer-term and global-scale consequences. Their efforts, which culminated in a paper entitled Global Atmospheric Consequences of Nuclear War, became known to those already concerned, and all parties agreed to work together. In view of the dramatically important nature of the still preliminary scientific findings on atmospheric effects, decisions were made. One, to form a steering committee to bring the findings, when further developed, to the attention of biologists and ecologists who would be asked to assess the implications for planetary life and life support systems. Two, to provide an appropriate forum for peer review of the findings of both physicists and biologists. And three, to make the findings as widely known to the public as possible. In the summer of 1982, the steering committee of the conference was established, a scientific advisory board was created, and a group of sponsoring organizations was formed. April 1983, 5 days of scientific preparatory meetings were held in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Okay. The conference is a special project of the Open Space Institute and the Global Tomorrow Coalition. And then many, many thank yous. That's a list of the advisory board. Principal conference speakers: Paul R. Ehrlich, Walter Orr Roberts, Donald Kennedy, Carl Sagan, Thomas Malone, and George Woodwell. I did not know that I had a photograph of Carl Sagan in the archives at all. Not terribly surprised that we have something with his photo in it, but until now I did not know it was even here. So their panels, they had, the keynote address was Donald Kennedy, the president of Stanford University. Carl Sagan talked about atmospheric and climatic consequences. Ehrlich talked about biological consequences. Then they had a panel on atmospheric and climatic effects, a panel on biological effects, and that appears to have been essentially that conference. So 3 years before the one that happened here at Virginia Tech, and I'm guessing the 83 conference was before the nuclear winter term was coined. So it has a much more lengthy and cumbersome name. Too large. All right, so let's see. So this is what they were preparing for possible publication in a book. So I would like to propose a toast to our host, which I think is very fitting. As a preface, I would remind you that before most of us were born, Maurice Maeterlinck, the Belgian poet, essayist, and philosopher, remarked that at every crossroads into the future, each enlightened person is confronted by 1,000 dedicated, the gap and then dedicated, the tape goes blank. Oh dear, the tape goes blank. Okay. The speech of Senator Gore picks up somewhere around the middle. Oh my gosh. Apparently they recorded the conference, but the recording missed the beginning of Al Gore's speech. Hilarious and amazing. And totally the way events actually run. We were discussing today a technical subject. I'm a thoroughly non-technical man, and you talk in soul-seeking. What? Sorry, I've not seen these remarks before, and I didn't parse the sentence properly. I shall try once again. And you talk in soul-seeking the nuclear energy, nuclear weaponry, nuclear power, as long as any man in the United States. Back in the early days of World War II, I was a young congressman, and Speaker Bankhead said to me one afternoon when I went in his office. Bankhead was a very distinguished and a fine speaker, and Sam Rayburn was the Democratic leader, and Sam was there. So he said, "Albert, Sam and I have decided to put a responsibility on you." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "President Roosevelt has called us down and says there is a very important top secret project that he was to undertake, and that if it is successful, we will win the war. This has to be handled in a very secret way, yet under the Constitution, Congress must appropriate money. We don't want anybody to know about it. We have selected 5 men, and you are one of them, to handle the appropriation for this project, which later became the Manhattan District Project." This is Al Gore's Sr., I don't know, I assume that is the father. I don't think that is the Al Gore that I'm going to look, because now I'm interested. Albert Gore Sr., American politician who served as a U.S. Senator from Tennessee from 1953 to 1971. So yeah, not so Albert Gore Jr. was vice president. So this is his father that was doing this, which I sort of suspected but wasn't 100% sure of, so had to look it up. Well, we handled the appropriations for it very secretly, hiding in the municipal appropriations for agriculture, arms, services. We put $1 billion here, $4 billion there. The Congress never knew what they were voting for, but they voted for the money to make the atom bomb. So that was my beginning, and I have been associated with it one way or another ever since, even until this day. Later on, I was the author of the first nuclear power bill to pass. Still later on, I was in General Stilwell's headquarters in Okinawa. Just a few days before we were scheduled to invade Japan, as we flew across the Pacific, we flew over hundreds of troop transports, all going to Japan. I looked down and I knew a number of Tennessee boys were on those ships. 3 of my own cousins were on those ships. We were in the headquarters of General Stilwell on Okinawa. He had a big map and he was showing us exactly where the landings would be made on Japan, and gave us the date within 2 or 3 days at the end of August, if the weather and the tides are when the invasion is to be made. And I will never forget the numb feeling I had when he said, "We expect to lose 500,000 men in that invasion, 500,000, and we think we will have to kill 1.5 million Japanese." Whew. Just here for coffee, yes, you are correct. Not the Al Gore that invented the internet. I have never actually dug into that claim. So I am uncertain of whether there's any truth behind the claim that Al Gore invented the internet. I know Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. Can you imagine 2 million people? No, you can't. Nobody can. 2 million is too large of a number to actually imagine. But while he was giving us this review, there was a kamikaze attack on his headquarters, and we dived for a dugout underneath. And some of you may not remember the kamikaze. It was a suicide pass. The next day we flew to the Philippines, where we spent a whole day with General MacArthur, whose wife was from Tennessee, family and neighbor and friend of my family, Jean Fairclough. He gave a brilliant review of the magnificent military victories as the United States forces marched across the Pacific. But about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, after dinner, he had finished briefing us. He concluded and said, "Gentlemen, the war will be over before you reach the United States." And we were leaving that afternoon for Hawaii. Can you imagine the criticism of the Congressional Committee on this plane as we had these stories? The commander of the landing forces saying that we would lose 500,000 men, and the theater general telling us the war would be over before we got back to the United States. We didn't have a very good opinion of either one of them. The next day we landed in Pearl Harbor, and this was when they still had extras in the newspaper, and the newspaper boys were running up and down the streets, "Extra, extra, extra." There were letters just as big as they could print on page 1. Atom bomb drops. All of us just stopped in our tracks. And then we flew on to California. We just couldn't understand how there could be such a difference. And I finally concluded that it could be just one thing. That is, that General MacArthur knew about the dropping of the atom bomb and General Stilwell didn't know about it. I was never able to resolve that until about a year ago. When I was on a plane with another group of congressmen, I was a senator then, with a committee, was going to the west to witness the explosion of the atomic bomb at Yucca Flats in Nevada. I told this story. We were standing up on the plane and we were taking a drink and talking, and the general, who was still, I don't know why he wasn't drinking, I thought generals always drank something, but anyway, he was still seated. But when he heard this story, he arose and joined the circle, and he said, "Senator Gore, I can verify your conclusion that one general knew about it and the other one didn't, because it was I who was commissioned to take the message to both generals. I informed General MacArthur the day before you were there, and General Stilwell after you had been gone." Now, I am not telling this to justify or attempting to justify the dropping of the atom bomb, the decision of President Truman. That is not my point, but I will tell you this. I do think about that 2 million people who did not die as a result of the dropping of the bomb. Well, we left Pearl Harbor and were off to California. And when we arrived in California, once again, extra, 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 and the headline was "Japan Sues for Peace." Well, this was a dramatic story for me. After returning from that trip to Yucca Flats, I was appointed chairman of the Disarmament Committee of the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I succeeded Hubert Humphrey as chairman of the Disarmament Committee. The first thing I did was to change the name of it. I changed the name to Nuclear Arms Control Subcommittee. It just seemed to me that disarmament didn't fit. Arms reduction didn't fit, no more than it fits now. Many times I noticed in the press out of Washington, somebody in the administration refers to the negotiation in Geneva where they seek arms reduction. That is not the key to that. Though I am not a technician, I know enough about it that I can make a 50% cut in the number of weapons, reduction 50%, and still come out with far more firepower with the 50% that remains. What we are talking about is arms control, and where do we start? Well, I'll come to that in a moment. I'm let me repeat, in no sense an expert in this crucial field, and yet I have had, I just told you a part of my experience, I sat beside an Adlai Stevenson when he was having that crucial debate in the United Nations with the Soviet delegate Zorin about nuclear weapons having been placed on Cuba. I am telling you, I saw all the secret telegrams that went back and forth. This was a very crucial time. Many people were transporting their children out of New York and out of Washington. My wife and I had a serious discussion of whether we would send our children to Tennessee. It was that close. Hell, I thought President Kennedy came through with a courage equal to Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, Douglas MacArthur, or anybody else in American history. Not only did the Russians agree to take their weapons off of Cuba, but they agreed to roll the tarpaulins back so we could fly over and photograph them to verify what they were doing. A grand and a great accomplishment. Well, I was a delegate to the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Conference. I helped negotiate it as Kennedy's representative, and I was the author of it in the United States Senate, and I led the debate to put it through to get it ratified. And I was also a delegate to the GAT Conference on Limited Trade, and also a delegate to the United Nations under the Kennedy administration. He and I were the closest of friends, the closest of personal friends. And there I negotiated the agreement, not a treaty, but an agreement on outer space that is still in effect. So you see, I have been involved in this business, though not an expert in any sense whatsoever, but I have developed some sensitivity on the subject, some deep conviction on the subject, and my son became very interested in the subject as a youngster. We always had a habit in our household of inviting the children to sit with us for dinner. I must say we had sort of an old-time custom that children are supposed to be seen and not heard. But they were listening, and Al developed an interest in this subject, and through school he studied it. Now he, Mr. Provost, you said I retired from the Senate. That was sort of an accident. It was a mistake on the part of the people of Tennessee. By a marginal error, they promoted me to private life. But ere long, my son came along, and the strangest political thing happened. The people, I think by the thousands, turned against me because I opposed the Vietnam War. I thought we were wrong about that. I thought Presidents Johnson and Nixon misrepresented the facts to the American people. In fact, I knew they did because I was on the Intelligence Committee and I had a right to all the facts, and I had all the facts. And I knew that our country was being misled, and at any rate, you know, Tennessee is a volunteer state. Show us a war and we'll fight it. And I had these horrible experiences of going home and walking down the street, and leading citizens who had been my friends for years would turn their head and refuse to shake hands with me. They were very sincere. I don't want to criticize them for that. They thought I was being disloyal to my country. And you know, if you think someone is being disloyal to your country, you don't want to shake hands with them. I had well, it is a little hard for me to say. I respected their judgment, but anyway, I recognized that they felt quite sincerely about it. But you know, 8 years later, when it was then revealed that I had been right all along on that issue, my son ran for the United States Senate, and damned if all of them didn't vote for him. They sort of cleansed their souls. I hope they did. Well, I'm telling you an allegory here of political life, but I'll tell you, I'll come back to this conference. Overall, I was impressed with the potential magnitude of the ultimate calamity that hangs over us. Let me repeat that. As I listened to the debates of these experts on nuclear winter, they didn't touch all the points. I've heard them all. They mentioned that the smoke and the dust might so cloud the sky that no crops would be grown for a year. They didn't mention that all the food in storage would be destroyed by the blast. Then how could people in New York City eat? It doesn't take long until you're hungry. Starvation is upon you. So I repeat, I was impressed with the potential magnitude of the ultimate calamity that hangs over us. What do we do? I must mention the challenge a statement that a very distinguished guest made today. I think he must have misspoke himself. The distinguished ambassador from Australia. He made an elegant speech today, and he said, and I quote, exactly, "There is no justification to use a nuclear weapon in the world today." We got the biggest applause of the day, with all respect, he got the biggest applause of the day, with all respect, and I spoke to him personally about this. I challenged that. I think there is a legitimate use for our nuclear stockpile, and that is to deter aggression upon the United States with nuclear weapons. If that is not justified, if that is not a justified use, then why are we in conference? Let's just unilaterally disarm. No, there is a justifiable use. And you know, with respect to deterrence, I discovered this kind of situation in our national policy. Today, Colonel Hawkins. What? Why you? Well, he is a nice man from North Carolina. Apparently South Carolina. Colonel Hawkins strongly advocated deterrence. Well, he and I had lunch together, and we agreed. We were in 100% agreement on that. And then another colonel representing the Air Force, what was his name? Batorn, likewise fully advocated deterrence. But you know, the commander-in-chief justifying the Star Wars said that deterrence was immoral. Have you forgotten that? Yeah, okay, I'm not going to dig through all of the remaining points here. It continues, but I think we got a really interesting part of that speech with the description of talking to General MacArthur just before the bombs were dropped in Japan, and the being told basically like 2 million people are about to die, and then the numbers being different. I don't know how many people actually died in when the bombs were dropped, but I thought that was interesting. It seems like Gore Sr. invented the digression. Oh, thank you, Justin, for coffee. That was, I enjoyed that comment. Let's see, Hannah, let's see. Well, according to several articles and a wiki, you found Al Gore did not invent the internet. However, he did help develop it. His help mainly seems to be in promoting it in Congress and getting a couple of bills passed that further helped the development and use of the internet. Thank you for looking that up, Hannah. 2 million figure was for if... Yes, Thorkel. 2 million was for, that was how many people were going to die combined on both sides if we invaded Japan rather than dropping the bombs. The bombs also killed people, and I don't know what the number of people who died from the bombs being dropped was, and how that compares to the 2 million. That was my thinking on it, was like, because he commented on how he was glad that those 2 million people didn't die, but people still died. And we can talk about the 2 million that didn't die from us doing an invasion, but we need to also balance that with, but this many people did die. So, yeah, it wasn't good. You're right, it was probably 0 Americans. So, I do have to leave it there. I've gone over by 16 minutes, and I found this to be a very interesting topic, and I'm glad that I took the time and that we got to explore this. Coming up next week, I do have another episode, although next week I think is like exam week or something, or possibly, I don't know. We're very near the end of the semester. I honestly have no idea what the timing is of when classes will end. This show continues regardless. I was gonna pull up and like tell you all what is the next episode. I just can't remember. No, don't do that. One second. I should really get this prepared beforehand. Next week, we're looking at the G. Graham Deuce papers. And for the life of me, I cannot remember what those are. Let me find out. Ooh, part of the Archives of American Aerospace Exploration, so aerospace, the papers of G. Graham Deuce, president of Deuce Aeronautical Research in Baltimore, Maryland. I could find no information about that company at all. I'm not certain it actually existed, other than him putting that as the name of who was communicating on communications he sent. Regardless, there's some lovely things in the collection relating to like the Martin XB-48, the Boeing XB-47, early jet planes. So we're gonna look at some early jet plane stuff next week. High estimates are 226,000, so a tenth of the forecast, but all on one side. Thank you, Justy, or Just Here for Coffee, for looking that up. I should go ahead and find us a raid to do, because I need to I need to take things down and head home. So let's see where we're gonna go. I'm thinking it might just possibly, it's been a couple of weeks. We might pop in and say hi to Stephen Joyce for some puzzle games. That seems like it could be a fun time. And a nice place to go after a somewhat heavy topic with nuclear winter. We're leaving on a jet plane, don't know when we'll be back again, except we do, it's on Wednesday at 2:30. Exactly, key squared. So yeah, next Wednesday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I will be right here sharing materials about early jet planes from the Deuce papers, and I would love to welcome you all in during that stream. I'm gonna go ahead and set up the raid here to have us just pop in on Stephen Joyce, who is sharing some new lovely puzzle games, and hopefully you will enjoy heading over there, and hopefully I will see you all again soon. Yeah, until I do, keep exploring history, everybody.